Hello, Gaston County. Welcome to episode number 77 of Gaston's Great, a podcast highlighting some of the great things happening in and around Gaston County. I'm your host, Stephen Long, and we are coming to you once again from the worldwide headquarters of GSM Services as we look forward to continue having great discussions in the coming weeks and months. We simply believe in discussing more of the reasons why Gaston's great. We have another terrific guest this week as we have Keanu Trujillo with us today, who is the host and creator of the Building Belmont Podcast. Keanu, it's great to have you on, and welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me, Stephen. Thank you for coordinating, Naomi.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, it's great to have you. So, we're going to get started. Keanu, if you could, just tell us a little bit about yourself, anything you'd like to share.
Sure. Well, I came to Gaston County. It's interesting how I ended up here, but I'm glad that I did. Definitely divine. God literally brought me here because I came to work for a church. So being here, I'm from New Mexico originally. I've been here for about 5 years now, and I originally lived here in Gastonia, and I was placed with the Gaston campus of Elevation Church. Church having many campuses in the area. It's interesting how it happened. I was between Matthews, Concord, and Gaston, and it wasn't my choice. It was up to the supervisors. Well, the supervisor of the Gaston campus at that time, Jason Price, he had the next up, kind of like the draft pick of, all right, hey, I get the next hire. So I ended up out here. We knew nothing about it. We moved here after a 3-day interview process. We had never been to North Carolina. I had felt impressed to apply to Elevation. I was getting out of the military at the time. I did a brief stint for a year in financial services, and I really felt called to full-time ministry to leverage my leadership there. And one morning I felt, you know what? I like what that church does. My church here isn't as prone to that urgency or the way that they're aggressive about reaching people for Christ. And so I had this impression that said, well, you can't bring that here, but you can go there. So one morning after being 6 months married, sorry, Naomi, being 6 months married, I woke up one morning and went to the gym, came back, told my wife, I think I'm going to apply to Elevation Church. And she said, like the Elevation Church, right? Because she's like Christian stardom, I guess. And I said, yeah. She said, are they hiring? I said, I don't know. She said, have you ever been to North Carolina? I said, no. She's like, well, all right. So I applied on a Tuesday. They called me on Wednesday. I called them back on a Thursday, and they had us on a plane on Friday.
Oh, wow.
And so we came out for that 3-day interview process. We didn't get to see much of Gaston County, just Charlotte. 3 weeks later, they gave us the offer. The next day, we picked a spot up here off of exit 19, sight unseen, and 3 weeks later, we were living in North Carolina. And the rest is history.
Wow,
we just fell in love with the community and decided to stay.
That's a whirlwind.
That was awesome. That's how I live my life, Stephen.
Well, again, I appreciate you sharing that. So it's always interesting to hear maybe it's a backstory how somebody ended up here in Gaston County because, you know, I'm a lifelong resident. Naomi is not a lifelong resident. But if you want to hear more about Naomi's story, you can listen to episode number, 75? Yeah.
It's worth a listen.
But anyway, I do appreciate that, and I think hopefully you couldn't get here quick enough, and now you're going to be here for the duration. So we're talking about your podcast, Building Belmont. So kind of, if you can, give us some background. How did that get started? What was the mission? What are you trying to accomplish? And because, listen, I've listened to a couple of excerpts from different episodes. It's really good, and so we're really, I just want to hear, let our listeners, hear about, kind of what's the backstory on that getting started.
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, being here for about 5 years, I spent 2 years with the church on staff there. And in my role in leadership development for the volunteer teams, I had a lot of leaders that owned businesses. 2 of them specifically were Summer and Preston Wilson. Another one was John Logan, owner of Luray Athletic Club. Summer and Preston Wilson, the owners of William Henry Salon, Ballard's Barbershop, and the Spa. So they became friends early through church, and I started to uncover these stories in the community, and I just love genuinely getting to know people's story. First time I was looking for a barber here before Ballard's was open, I went and sat at a barbershop. I waited for like 2 hours. I won't say what the barbershop was. I don't want to give it a bad rap. I don't think it's open anymore. And I sat next to a guy who got his whole life story, how his dad passed away from cancer when he was young. He lived with his mom in Concord. I go back to tell my wife about it, and I'm telling her this guy's life story. And she said, what was his name? I said, I didn't ask his name. I just got his whole story. So I genuinely love getting people's story. So I started to learn their stories, and one story that really stood out to me was actually the story of William Henry Ballard. You're a lifelong Gaston County resident. Do you know his story,
I do not.
Henry Ballard? I
know the name, but I do not know the story.
He is Preston Wilson's great-grandfather. Okay. He owned a barbershop in what's now East Belmont. And Preston would go in and sweep around his grandfather's barbershop when he was young for a nickel. And he really learned a lot from him. He was a Navyman. He was a Belmont City councilman. And he really helped to shape the man that Preston is today. Well, Preston, I'll make the story short. Preston's going to love or hate that I shared the story. His grandfather actually ended up passing him down his barber chair after he passed away. And Preston actually used that chair as later on an investment that got into real estate, which then eventually became what is now William Henry Salon. And that was legacy work. Well, where I come from in northern New Mexico, I like to say it's like if the middle of nowhere had a middle of nowhere, that's where I'm from. So it's where New Mexico's, Texas, Oklahoma's, and Colorado's middle of nowhere's meet. And I'm right there on the corner.
Okay.
So entrepreneurship or, legacy just wasn't really encouraged. You lived paycheck to paycheck. We lived very poor. We took care of our family. That was humble. That was noble. But they had started to instill a mindset in me that, hey, legacy is important. It's not about what you do in this lifetime. It's about what you leave behind. Well, William Henry Ballard was leaving a legacy in Preston that ultimately led to this legacy now. They have about 100 providers in that organization and so many others that they've inspired, like myself, to become entrepreneurs. So I knew that story, but I knew most people didn't know that story. So I said, well, I don't want to be selfish and start capturing these stories. I should start recording them. Well, I had started a podcast with my first business and still primary business, True Strategy, because I loved talking to people and getting their story and hearing myself talk to a degree. And so I thought, well, let me use those skills and serve my community, because most of my business, because I started it June of 2020 and COVID, was with my network that was everywhere else. So a lot of my business was not in this area. So it left a big gap to say, well, how can I serve my community here? Because I don't really do a lot of my coaching and consulting here in the area. Now that's started to change, but it's still intentional to say, well, what can I do to give back? So I started thinking about, what about a podcast to interview local business owners and understand their story, partially also to serve them, because when you know Steven's story and you know the story of GSM and you know the story of, and I was reading it out in the lobby, how Fred started GSM, your grandfather, right? And then passed it on to Ronnie and Judy. And now you and your brother Joel run the company. That's legacy work. When they connect with that story, it's so much more than heating and cooling, right? Or services. I'm connected to that story. So I wanted to do that coming out of COVID, because personal is so powerful. So when people were shopping at, Gigi's boutique, or they were getting their haircut at Ballard's, or they were visiting, Majid at Everyday Market, they can connect with the person, and that investment goes so much further. So we started and, just continued to build from there. Got some great episodes. We've been able to actually monetize the podcast at this point. The reason being is so that way it can continue to sustain itself.
Sure.
And, now we're here talking to you guys. So again, being able to share our story. And this is the first time I've been interviewed about my story.
Well, good.
So
yeah.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear that.
That's what led to Building Belmont and getting started there and starting capturing some of those stories. We say capturing stories, creating connection, and sharing information.
Okay, well, if you look at the list of your guests, it's good. I mean, a few people that I know on there. Jennifer Church, I know is someone that's in my Rotary Club, and I've gotten to know. And so, but it's good to see that. It's good to hear, because you're right. Those stories are often not told, or not enough people know about them, or you might even call that, what's that brand story, right? For companies that. Oftentimes, business owners they don't want to share that, and they should. Even we probably don't do as good a job as we should about sharing, the history and about our company. So, what have you can you share? What have you learned through your? I mean, how many episodes have you recorded so far?
We have recorded about 35 episodes.
That's what I thought it was. I was thinking 33 to 35. So what have you learned through those 35 episodes, or what stands out the most? As you've talked to these business owners and giving them an opportunity to share about that.
Well, what's interesting is what you just shared there, that most people won't share their story. And I think it's because we don't want to be in any way self-serving.
Yep.
So we think, well, I don't want to share my story because now I'm making it about me. Well, if that's where it stops, then that's true. But how do you share your story to connect with a person to ultimately serve them? And so I did find that, to be common. I thought, well, everyone would love to share their story. That's not true. There are some people, I won't say who, that I really want to get on the podcast, but they're very humble and say, I don't want to be on camera. So we're going to figure it out. Maybe I'll just trick them into it one time. But I've learned that. I've also learned that there's just this way that Gaston County operates that is very special. And I am of the personality type that I really like an underdog. I was really pulling for TCU against Georgia, and my friends whom we watched the game at their house, who are big Georgia fans, thankfully they love me. They almost kicked me out. But the game was over 5 minutes in, so we didn't have to worry about
unfortunately,
it.
you're correct.
An underdog, and what I had found working with Elevation was even the Gaston campus was treated as an underdog because that's how Gaston County is treated by Charlotte. Well, the underdog is on the rise, and in a way that's very thoughtful, that I'm almost thankful that people discounted Gaston County that were in Charlotte, because it's given Gaston County an opportunity to flourish very intentionally. With Belmont's development, with what's happening here in downtown Gastonia, it wasn't overdeveloped because so many people wanted to rush to be there, right? So I started to learn more and more as I'm interviewing people that, Naomi, I want to get to know more of your story, but they're not from here, but they treat it like they were born and raised here, like their roots are from here. There's a love for this community, even from most people that aren't from the area. And you're a rare breed that is actually from and born and raised here. So I just started to see that love for community and started to find even more so ways to give back through that. We started to work with some nonprofits. One that we worked with specifically was Strong Like AK. Adam Kincaid, AK, he was a 17-year-old who lost a battle to juvenile cancer a few years back, and his family, I admire their courage. Instead of letting it tear them apart, or instead of having it push them away, they got back into the fight and they started this nonprofit. Kim Webb, who is Adam's mother, actually now is able to step away from her full-time job and go full-time into the nonprofit at this point. And they're looking to build homes near hospitals where or cancer treatment centers. Yep. So they're getting right back in that fight, and those stories are right in our backyard. So started to see, well, how can we leverage this platform even more so to serve that, even beyond what I had originally intended? Because the platform being a passion project, it can take on different forms depending on what's in front of us. So it really has proven to be a great connector of people, and again, we're here now because of that connection, so I'm just thankful for it.
Okay, very good. So this is a question that I get asked all the time, and I never answer it, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So do you have a favorite episode that you've recorded, or maybe what? Oh, no question, right. Naomi. Episode 75. Yes, absolutely.
Do I have a favorite episode? Man, that's tough. I really can't think of one, specifically. I understand why you don't answer it now.
I'm the same way, yeah.
I will say our last 3 episodes, it wasn't intentional. I had a few people say, did you plan that? I was at a bar. I had an interview with John Searby, Catawba Riverkeeper.
Oh, yeah. We've had John on the podcast.
We met at the River Room, and we had a beer because we were at a bar. Then I met with Patrick Murphy from Heirloom and Honeycomb Cafe. They have my most favorite old fashioned because it's barrel aged, so we had a drink.
Yeah, listen, I got reservation tomorrow night, Friday night at Heirloom.
Have you had the barrel aged old fashioned? Do you drink? I don't want to.
Oh yeah, okay. I'm a big craft beer guy myself. Finding breweries when we travel is kind of we my wife and I and another couple, we plan out trips based on how we can get to the breweries on the way.
Okay.
So yes. I don't know that I've had that. But I might have to check it out Friday.
If you're a bourbon fan.
Yes.
Okay. So we had a drink there, and then I interviewed Jay Pithwa with now it was Thirsty Dog Social Club. Now it's Thirsty Social Club in North Belmont, Nobel, as they're affectionately calling it. I'm trying to help with the brand a little bit, Nobel. And we had a beer there too. And so people were like, oh, are you okay? Like, yeah, absolutely. We were at a bar though, like when in Rome.
Yeah.
So those were fun, but I can't say I have had a favorite episode. Every story is so unique that it's just really fun to connect with those people, real authentic. And we told Naomi, hey, if we start to get too long, cut us off, because you start to feel like, oh, I forgot we're recording. We're just having a genuine, friendly conversation. So
what kind of feedback have you gotten after 35 episodes from the community, from some of your, the guests you've had on, and what are you hearing about, what you're doing and what you're sharing with about Belmont?
Oh, all kinds of feedback. I thought it would all be positive. I don't know why I was so naive to think, oh, everyone's going to love this. Not everyone does. When you're capturing someone's story, it doesn't leave room for any type of agenda or narrative. And that's not the point. Yeah. I don't want that to be the case. And so most feedback, though, has been very positive. I've come to find, it's been interesting, mostly people that are new to the area are the ones that really engage with it. That may be also a demographic thing. They're, a lot of millennials or people closer to my age that really like to see, wow, I've always been curious about fill in the blank, and I listened to your podcast and I got to find out, can you do an episode on fill in the blank, right? So being able to see that it's actually a lot of the newer people to the area, or transplants, of course, that like to use that as an opportunity to get connected. And then they see someone on the podcast, and then they go in and say, oh, I saw you on the podcast. I feel like I know you. So I've gotten that feedback that, there's a lot of questions that people that just aren't from here are curious about. So we're starting to gather that information and be more intentional to actually produce the episodes people are already asking questions about or wanting to hear. We've done a little bit. We're trying to narrow in our Google Analytics to say, what are people Googling in Belmont or in Gaston County? Maybe try to answer some of those questions.
That's interesting. Well, I don't think we've done that relative to the podcast, have we?
But at the same time, people that are from here are very thankful because it's being captured. That legacy is being captured. I think, and for example, it may have been in a different format, but one day, Lord willing, you're going to pass this company down to your grandkids and their grandkids, and they'll get to hear your story. And what would it have been like to hear Fred talk about why he started GSM and actually have that captured? So there is that legacy element that says we're preserving it in time, and we want to pass that along. So just as much as the transplants have been grateful and they've given a lot of feedback about what they want to learn, those that have been in the area are also more mindful to say, okay, we need to capture this now. We need to capture that so that way we can preserve that. Ellen Milliken is one that we want to get on the podcast so we can get his story to understand what he's done to preserve history in Gaston County.
Okay, very good. So I appreciate you sharing that, because we've gotten most of our feedback has been positive. I mean, I've had a couple messages here or there, or emails here or there that says, "Why don't you do this?" or "Why don't you do that?" That kind of thing,
Yeah.
But it's interesting. But in general, we've gotten really positive feedback as well about what we're trying to accomplish here. So, Keanu, looking ahead, I mean, where do you see Building Belmont going, and what do you see the future of? And you got any specific plans? Any other, or are you just sticking with the format that you're currently doing, or what's the future look like?
Logistically, I want to get to a point where I just get to show up and interview and have conversations with people. So being able to produce, I have a media agency that does most of my production. I have them on contract. Barajas Company, Dale Barajas, shout out to them. They do most of the production, but I want to get to a point where all of that's systemized and I'm able to just come in and enjoy stories. But the real point of it, just as in everything that I do, is to encourage the next person. And it doesn't have to be someone that takes over Building Belmont. It could be someone that wants to start their own podcast. Maybe Eileen from Belmont NC Happenings. She has the most, I think, engaged with Instagram page in Belmont. She's always posting about what's going on. Maybe she wants to start a podcast, and we've had her on the podcast before to say, okay, this is how you do that. And it may not even be a podcast. For me, it's really about encouraging that next generation of entrepreneurs in various ways. My first company, and again, still my primary company, True Strategy, I do consulting with businesses and teams really around people problems, and then people problems expose process problems, which expose people problems, which expose process problems. So that allows me to get into these businesses and help to build them or establish them or take them to where they want to go. But I want to do that in every way. So I have vision in the future for a co-working space, a very intentional co-working space. That's not just, hey, you rent your space, you rent yours, I rent mine, we'll see each other in the kitchen. I lease space in TechWorks right now. Terry's done a great job there. Yeah. I want to add a layer of intentionality at some point to encourage that next generation. So the vision for it is really just using it as a platform to say, hey, maybe you want to do something like this, or you want to do something completely different. How can we help to encourage that? Just like Summer Wilson, Preston Wilson, John Logan, Q Nicole McNair, who's also another entrepreneur here in the area, they encouraged it in me. They said, hey, it's possible. You should do that. Not only that, they were some of my first clients. They were the first people to put their money where their mouth is and say, hey, you need to start this business. So I want to create that more and more for generations to come beyond even what we can see right now.
Right. Yeah. One thing I've learned to love about podcasting is that just the medium in itself is so easily accessible. If you go on, I guess, Apple Podcast or Spotify or anything, and you type in any type of subject, you can probably find a podcast that's talking about that subject. And so the educational opportunities, and frankly, it's easier to get started than I thought it was going to be. And I remember the first 5 episodes, it was just a bumbling, unfortunately, those first few companies organization we had to come in are probably looking back, boy, what a difference, now compared to those first few episodes. And but to your point, it's a great way to reach other people and just put yourself out there. And it's surprising. The response is I guess I would say is surprising, but I appreciate your comments about what's next for other people and how you can maybe encourage somebody, because I think a lot of people have these ideas in their head. They're just either afraid to do it or they don't know how to go get started doing things. So that's a great thing to hear.
It's interesting you mentioned the first 5 episodes because I've come to find, as in business, if you think about helping someone start a business and you almost feel this weight of like, okay, it needs to exist 100 years later, like GSM. I got to be there for that whole journey. It's really like the first 5%, right? How do you establish an LLC, right? How do you open a business bank account? How do you get your first client? That's it. You really exist in that first 5%, and they'll take it from there. But it's that 5% that will keep someone from starting a business. Something simple like that. How do I start an LLC? Go to, LegalZoom. Now, you can just go to the Secretary of State website and start it there for $129. But that'll keep someone from actually starting a business. So you mentioned getting through those first 5 episodes. Now you guys are rocking and rolling. 75 episodes is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a question that's been burning inside me. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Why did you start the podcast? Like I want to take me inside of the brainstorming room. When Steven comes in, he has his whole executive team in front of him, and he slaps a microphone on the table and says, "We're going to start a podcast." Like, tell me that story of how that happened.
So it was, oddly enough, our first episode was March 2020. So that's the same month that COVID hit and everything shut down. So that was just by chance. To make a relatively long story short, there was a gentleman here named Jesse Cole who used to own we had a college summer baseball team here. And he was just terrific, involved in the community. He now owns the Savannah Bananas. He's actually a big deal now nationally, and maybe internationally even now with the Savannah Bananas. But we started doing these videos years ago and we called them Gaston's Great. We went around to different locations like Crowder's Mountain, the YMCA, Stowe Botanical, the Community Foundation run. We did 15 to 20 of these videos, and we shared them, and then we didn't do anything with it for a while, so we owned the URL. And I kept thinking back in my mind, I wanted to keep doing something else because there's so much negativity. You mentioned the view that Charlotte has about Gaston County, and I just, being a lifelong resident and my personally being involved in so many things like the United Way, Gaston Together, the Community Foundation. There's so many organizations that I personally have seen doing the good work. The Police Foundation here locally, I was a board member for a while. So we just felt, let's do something to expose these organizations and people that are doing so great work around here. And let's talk about something positive. Let's put something out that shows that Gaston County really is a great place. And it really was that simple. I mean, interesting along the way. I've had a few people ask me, well, what's in it for you? What's the point? I said, well, there is really no point other than let's talk about something good. And selfishly, I didn't realize this at the time, but it's been fun. I mean, we've met so many great people. A lot of the people that I already knew, but some of them I had never met before. And so it's been, and I hope that's what we've accomplished through 76 episodes is talking about, good, positive things going on in Gaston County. And we've got another 5 or 6 probably already scheduled, to record in the next, month or so. And as long as people continue to, call us or call us back or email us back, we're going to keep doing it. So that was it. There was no other grand scheme. And I remember thinking I had done enough research, and I'm a podcast listener. I mean, I've got 10 to 15 that I listen to. I just rotate through them. And anytime I'm on my vehicle or running, I am a podcast guy. And I haven't listened to the radio, gosh, I don't know how long. But there was a lot of articles I read that said most podcasters get to that 7 or 8 episode and they're done. So that 7th and 8th episode, I was like, okay, we're going to get past that because that's what I read is they either run out of ideas or they get discouraged because they don't have any followers. And I don't know, we don't have a whole lot of followers, but we have enough that, we've hit, 11,000 downloads or whatever. Yeah, I mean, that's to me, I'm just like, what?
That's amazing.
That seems, yeah. I mean, when we hit, I saw your note, scrolling through yours that you hit 2,500 like after very few. It was quicker than we got to 2,500. So well done. And so I'm just thinking, yeah, really? I'm thinking if we had 50 people listen, that would be enough for me, to keep doing it. But it's been a lot better than that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was just the, we started on a podcast just because I've been listening to podcasts consistently for 7 or 8 years probably, and whether it's a leadership podcast or a spiritual podcast or a business podcast or a humor podcast, sport relay, whatever. I mean, I listen to a lot myself. So
it's a very different relationship from numbers like on TikTok or an Instagram reel that are, 50,000, views on one video that's posted for a day, because that's, 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds of someone's life. Whereas when someone actually sits down and listens to a podcast episode, 30, 45 minutes, an hour, that is a much more involved and intimate relationship. And so the numbers look different, but they're also more valuable. So, for example, if you have Jesse Cole Jesse Cole,
yeah.
I'm sure he's listening to your episodes because he likes you, right?
Maybe.
So that's
he might be too big of a deal now to listen to us. But.
Maybe. Shout out, hey, Jesse, remember us. He's listening to that. It's much more engaged. You won't find him probably scrolling TikTok. So there's also the mindset around people that engage with podcasts that are usually more involved, more successful at a different stage of their career and wanting to get more engaged. So the numbers are different. You guys are doing a great job with what you're doing here at, 11,000 downloads already. And I read a stat somewhere too, that if you have more than, I think it was like 28 downloads a week, just 28, which I know you guys are already doing.
Yeah.
Just 28, you're in the top 50% of podcasts worldwide. Because that's same
all
point,
That's all you, Naomi.
You're crushing it. You're probably top 20%. So it's an interesting medium.
The funny thing this past week was that episode with Naomi and Amy. I mean, as of yesterday, was 138 views on YouTube, and I don't even know how many times the audio has been downloaded. So I hadn't even looked at that. Very well. So good. So we'll have to. You're right. Maybe we need to switch. We switch spots, and it may really blow up.
You have to get a polo like that, though. That is awesome.
Yeah, it's what's the phrase? What would we call it? Obnoxious? Is that extra?
Extra.
Okay.
Are you an extra type of guy, Stephen?
Only with these shirts.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'm not much of an extra guy, am I? Not really. Silk? No. Okay. So, kind of remembering, we're kind of focusing on Belmont today, obviously, but it is a big part of Gaston County. Maybe one of the most well-known, municipalities here, and it's great. I mean, I spend a lot of time in Belmont myself. But focus on Gaston County. Why would you say Gaston County is better because of your podcast and what you're doing?
Ooh, that's a big question. Talking about yourself, right? How is Gaston County better? My hope would be that in time it would be made better, that people would be intentional to connect, or even just understand how easy it is to connect in this community. It's unlike any other place that I hope that people see that, okay, if that guy coming from nowhere, middle of nowhere, New Mexico, can come in and connect with all these people, then so can I. Because genuinely, if you engage with someone here in Gaston County, most people are willing to sit down and have a conversation. They're not too busy. They're not going to big time you or ignore you. There's a humility in the county. So I would hope that people would see that, hey, I can connect with people, and there's a story there that people have to tell, and I want to engage with that. So I don't think we've accomplished that yet. But I do think that, as Paul would say, I've not accomplished it yet, but I press forward. So, I would hope that people would be more encouraged to engage with each other in that way. And how is it made better now? I don't quite know. I don't know how we measure that at this point. Okay. We just started I think we started in March too, but 2022, in March. And so we haven't even been, we're still a newborn. We'll see how that takes shape. But I just hope that it served those people that maybe if it's brought in a couple more clients to a business, or, maybe if it's given a couple more dollars to Strong Like AK in their organization, as long as it's connecting people, then it makes it better in that way.
Okay, very good. And you know what? I just told a flat out lie. It was March 2021 when we started. I don't know where in the world I was going with that, but it was exactly a year after COVID. And so we had all that. And I don't know what your experience was with, this is my opinion, it seemed like through COVID, there was a little bit, another thing that kind of drove us starting was, seemed like we had a little bit less grace for each other. Just in general, a little less patience for each other in general. So we kind of saw some of that through COVID. And so that was another reason why we kind of felt like it might be a good time. And people were, still 2021, people were still remote working and had a lot of time at home. So maybe we thought maybe people would listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
So
you got me so excited there. I threw my pencil to take a note. Exactly to that point, 2020 made it so easy to dehumanize people because they're that politician or they're that media person. We'll never meet them. So because we were disconnected also from each other, and then of course we're disconnected from them, it was so easy to say that's just the big bad wolf, right? What I wanted to do with the podcast was to humanize people, and we're even doing some things that may be not as popular, but I want people to see that's a person behind that, or that there's actually someone there, that GSM, although it is a very successful and well-known company in the county, that's Stephen, right? That's a person, that's a human behind that. And we all became so prone to dehumanize others instead of understanding, well, how can I connect with that person? And so with our podcast, there's no hiding. You're going to see me at Harris Teeter or Aldi, just like you're going to see anyone, and we can sit down and have a conversation so we can actually face those things. And another point that you brought to mind was personal is powerful. We all know the marketing schemes at this point, right? You know that if you go onto a website and it says 15% off, just enter your email. Why are they capturing that email, Naomi? So they can continue to contact you.
That's right.
It's not a surprise anymore. It's not a surprise that when you even go to, you're scrolling Instagram and it says, hey, get this free book, just pay shipping. That is a lead gen, right? That is a funnel. Then they're going to go and sell you the $2,000 thing later. Everyone knows those things now. Yeah. So let's get beyond that and actually connect personally. There was a time where the big media or these big strategies for marketing were very, very successful because it was new. Well, just like in the church world, there were the hymns and then there were the rock bands. What are even the mega churches singing now? Hymns, because everything's cyclical. And right now, from a marketing perspective or a connection perspective, personal is powerful again. I don't want to connect with that media company that's thousands of miles away. I want to connect with those that are in my community.
Yeah.
So anyways, you got me excited about that, talking about, connecting people through COVID and what it did to us, that we, through these platforms, can help to be that bridge again here in our community. We can't really do anything else about anywhere else. We can't even do anything about Charlotte.
What can we control? What we can control, right? Yeah. It's here local. Everything is local, in my opinion. I do vote every 2 years, but then after that, what can I control here at GSM? What can I control here in Gaston County? What can I affect and impact here? And it is that personal relationships and everything going on. So what haven't I asked? Any other questions I should have asked but haven't? Anything else you'd like to share about the podcast before we we're going to shift gears here briefly for some Gaston County question. But of course, before we finish, we'll make sure we swing back around and so everyone knows where to find the podcast and how to learn more or get involved or suggest potential, guests for you, anything like that. We'll make sure we cover that before we finish.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we covered a lot of ground there. But if anyone has any questions or any suggestions, then we're definitely open to it. Naomi, did we miss anything? Awesome.
Are you sure? Okay. So we're going to call this I guess we're just going to be just lame as normal and call it the Building Belmont speed round of questions.
Speed round.
I can't come up with anything better. And we change it every week. So you've been here long enough as a Gaston County resident to answer some of these questions. So this is really what, family, friends, you're a podcast guest. This is what they really want to know about you and hear about. So have you ever been to Tony's Ice Cream?
I have.
So what's your favorite Tony's Ice Cream flavor?
Popular or unpopular, it would be the grape.
Grape. That has been a grape and lemon or two that have been a surprising answer multiple times there.
Well, I said popular and unpopular because anytime I bring friends in and say, you got to try the grape, like, grape?
Yeah.
Just trust me. But here in the community, it's popular. It's actually funny how we found Tony's. My best man flew out here with us when we moved to help us settle in, and then he flew back home. Great guy. But he's a big believer in Yelp. Like, when he goes into a new community, he'll go to Yelp and he'll see what's going on. And he's scrolling through Yelp and he's like, what is this place? He found Tony's. And it had like astronomical reviews for being just in the middle of nowhere. He's like, everywhere else pales in comparison. Like, what is this place? So we went, and it was a little underwhelming at first, and then we got the ice cream, and it's like, okay. So we did that our second night in town, thankfully. So yeah, Tony's is literally world famous.
A story that my dad used to tell was he lived not far from Tony's on Avon. He grew up on Avon Street, so within walking distance of Tony's. And he used to tell stories. He would him and his buddies, they would start walking to Tony's, and if they found enough, like a coin or enough change, like a 5 nickel, they could get ice cream. Or they would do the same thing to the movie theater. They would walk toward the movie theater, and hopefully they would find change laying around or something. And if they didn't, they'd come back home. But Tony's has been around a very long time, longer than GSM actually. So we appreciate that. How about Sundrop or Cheerwine? It's 2 locals' favorites.
I'm gonna lose some followers with this one. I don't really like either. I don't. And it's funny because we were again, being a fan of bourbon, was hanging out with some friends. Bourbon and diet ginger ale is any bourbon and diet ginger ale is my go-to. Well, we ran out of ginger ale, but we had still plenty of bourbon. Well, my buddy had some Diet Sundrop in the fridge, and I'm like, well, let's just do this, and I'd be fine with it. And there were some local fears of like, you're gonna get a kidney stone, and I'm like instantly. Like instantly? No. I'm like, okay. Not a big fan. It was a surprise to me. A lot of my volunteers when I was with the church, we would go out for coffee and have a meeting just to connect. So do you want a coffee? No, I'll just get a Cheerwine. Yeah. Like Cheerwine is Gaston County coffee for some
Well,
locals.
It is, and that's one reason for that question. But actually, I have to admit, I'm not a big I used to be a big-time Sundrop drinker 20 years ago. But the true story is I gave it up for Lent one time. And on Easter, when I went to drink it again, I couldn't do it because I had gone 40 days without it. And so anyway, but I'm just not a big soft drink guy anymore. I mean, I drink maybe a couple a month. So anyway, so my point is I appreciate your answer to that question.
I was kind of afraid to answer that one. Anyway.
Oh, listen, that we've had more than one person say that, or they give us something else as an answer. So we'll put bourbon down.
Bourbon, yeah. What's your favorite soft drink? Bourbon.
Favorite local restaurant?
Favorite local restaurant? Oh, that's tough because we have some really awesome new ones in Belmont.
Yeah, you do.
Now.
Yeah.
Heirloom coming in has been quite a treat. Honeycomb as well, its sister. Before that, I would say Webb's. Let's come your way a little bit. I'd say Webb's. The experience, again, Jim Marasso, great human being.
Yeah, great community servant. Yes,
great community servant. He's also another one that came from Charlotte and was like, Gaston County's that land like in Lion King that you don't go to. And he's like, I can't believe that I thought that for so long now. He loves it, literally lives there. So I'd say Webb's.
Okay, yeah, that's a good answer and a popular answer as well. How about favorite outdoor activity in Gaston County or favorite park or anything you have?
Crowder's Mountain.
Yeah, Crowder's is great.
I do the quick straight up hike. That's kind of my life. Like I'm also a big guy, so like 100 meters as fast as I can. That's it. I'm not an endurance person. So we did hike the long trail one time, and I thought I just like the one where we go straight up. It's like that's like more difficult. Yeah, but it's quicker. Let's get to the top. Yeah, Crowder's Mountain. I'm with you there. Yeah, Crowder's Mountain is a great asset here to the county. So this is my question, and I may modify it slightly just to see what happens here. But UNC Duke, NC State, or University of New Mexico? Clemson. I get a lot of heat. I'm a little bit of. I mentioned pre-show that because New Mexico has a football team that's not really much to cheer for. I was very college football, agnostic. I just loved college football. So we could be watching any game. We could be watching, D3, whatever. I just love football. So moving here, when I had moved here, Clemson was on that rise, but I also loved Dabo Swinney as a man. But I started liking Clemson before I even moved here. Well, then I also found out it's very unpopular to like Clemson here in Charlotte because it's UNC Duke, but they have a combined hatred for Clemson. And then you have SC, right? So they also do not like Clemson. So I like kind of being contrarian. And so during the UNC Duke rivalry week, depending on who I'm talking to, I'll pick the other team. So I'm talking to a big-time UNC fan. I'm like, I just think Duke has their number this year. I'm talking to a Duke fan. I'm like,
Well, not that it matters, but NC State did just put a beat down on Duke by over 20 points here a couple games ago. So
you're an NC State guy.
Forever that's worth. Yes, I am a. Matter of fact, my dad went there, my uncle went there, my brother and I went there. So yeah, we grew up with the disease of NC State athletics.
I'll let it slide that NC State stole UNM's logo, their mascot. So I'm confident that's not true, but
we will. Yeah, we will have. We just had something to edit out of the podcast episode. Naomi.
It was comforting though to see the for the listeners, the NC State Wolfpack mascot. It looks strikingly similar to the UNM Lobo, which is Spanish for wolf, and it made me feel kind of at home when I started seeing these NC State stickers all over the place.
I'm sure we were first, and it was copied from NC State. I'm sure of that.
I'm sure.
What is Keanu? What is something very few people know about you?
What is something very few people know about me? I spent a lot of time in the military. I had been shot in the right leg, not in the military. So let you stew on that a little bit. Not during my service.
That's a first. That's definitely a first that we've heard on the podcast.
And I've jumped out of a perfectly good helicopter at 120 feet.
Oh, my.
Yeah. There was a rope. So
there is.
I rappelled
that's
out.
At least two that we have not heard before on our episode. So, on any of our episodes. What about got a book or something that you've, besides, and of course, you asked for a podcast recommendation. So besides Building Belmont, a podcast you listen to or a book that you might recommend to our listeners?
My favorite book, second only to the Bible, is called Rhinoceros Success by Scott Alexander. It's a book that when I did my year in finance with Northwestern Mutual, it's something that long ago a managing partner for the company adopted, giving this book to all of his potential new hires. He'd give them the book and say, read this and come back to me. And if it resonated with them or if they identified with it, he knew they'd be a good fit. If it didn't, the process stopped.
Oh, wow.
So I got this book when I went into finance. Thankfully, he gave it to us after, we were hired. But I read that book now about every 6 months. It's a quick read. It's a fun read. Okay. But it just talks about this rhinoceros mindset. And actually, this was a gift from Summer Wilson when I first started the company. This was our old logo, the one I designed. Our new logo is much better. Similar, though. And she got that for me. It's a rhino.
Wow.
It's a rhinoceros cool. On the cup, established 2020. Now, at least that means something. When she first got this for me and it was 2020 still, it's like, should have just said EST yesterday. Now that it's 2023, it feels a little bit better. But Rhinoceros Success is an awesome book about mindsets. It won't resonate with everyone. Yeah. He talks about the difference between a rhino and a cow. And it's not a bad thing. My wife would read the book and say, oh, yeah, I'm a cow. I'm okay with that. Cows, they graze. And he even has a silly part in the book where he says, we need cows. We need someone to cash our checks. But it's all about this entrepreneurial mindset of like charging forward and having thick skin and adopting this rhinoceros mindset, even seeing yourself as a rhino. So when I get out of bed in the morning, I'm a 1-ton, massive snorting, rhinoceros that's charging after the day. So it's a fun book, but it also is good for encouraging mindsets. It's my favorite book.
Good. Well, listen, I'm a big reader, and especially business, personal development. That's in about every. Well, actually, probably 80% of what I read is those type of books. I'll throw in a little, fiction every now and then. So again, I appreciate you sharing that. That's definitely one I will check out. So we're getting ready to wrap this up, Keanu. I appreciate your time. So besides Building Belmont Podcast, why would you say Gaston County is such a great place?
Gaston's Great Podcast.
Very good answer.
It's local. Even in my own hometown, I don't feel as connected. In my hometown, I have more followers on the Building Belmont Instagram than there are people in my hometown. It's not to say much, it's 1,000 people. I still don't feel as connected as I do in this community. Okay. This community is very, very personal. And like I said before, people like to connect. So it's like, in the best ways, it's frozen in time in the way people want to get to know each other. So if you actually go out and you engage in the community and you're intentional to do that, people will want to get to know you. They'll want to get to know your story. They'll encourage you. They'll ask, how can I help, if you're an entrepreneur? And that's something that I feel like we don't have as often, especially in Belmont, but I could say the same for Cramerton, for Mount Holly, for Gastonia. Gastonia is much, much larger, so it's a little bit different. But, in Belmont, if you sit at Everyday Market and you're having coffee, 4 people are going to drive by and honk and wave because everyone just knows each other and they engage in that way. And so it really sets it apart. And especially when you look at Charlotte, the greater metro area, I know that I'm biased, but I spent a lot of time in these other communities because of elevation. We had campuses in Lake Norman, in Concord, in Blakeney, in Rock Hill, in Ballantyne, in Uptown. none of them had that connection to the community like Gaston County did. And you look at Charlotte and you see this very industrial place, and then there's this real subtle hometown kind of vibe that you get from Gaston County, and you just don't get that anywhere else in the community. I'm a big recruiter for Gaston County, so there's a mindset, especially in Belmont, that everyone wants to be the last one in, right? You know, they moved here yesterday, and they're saying, it's getting too crowded. Well, you know, thankfully, we didn't stop you from coming. I can't remember who said it to me, but they said everyone wants to be the last one, and they want to raise the drawbridge after they make it into Belmont. And, you know, I may be part of the problem. I'm a big recruiter for Gaston County to say, have you thought of Gaston yet? Have you thought of Belmont? Because most people won't. And so it's just a special place. I want people to have that kind of connection as well. And, you know, you just don't find that. It's very hard to find that in most places. And I do travel all over the country for my work, and I find myself missing that. Like, who's your local? It's, I don't really know. I just go to Starbucks or whatever. Yeah. So very personal.
Well, I appreciate that. And I agree. I agree completely. That's well said. So knowing what you know now, Keanu, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Start a business. Ask more questions.
Oh,
ask more questions. I say this often, and even in my line of work, I ask a lot of questions. And as a young man, especially with the mindset of, you know, I played football most of my life, and you know, went into corrections, then law enforcement, then the military, finance, ministry. There was always this pressure of having to have the answer. And if you don't have the answer, you know, you say, I don't know, but I'll find it. But it's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's okay to ask more questions. And now, even if I'm just having just a conversation, Naomi and I are connected and getting to know your story, and you say, that's a great question. I'd rather hear that's a great question than, oh, that's really good advice, or, oh, thank you for that answer. I want to ask good questions. And so if I were, God forbid, the Lord calls me home tomorrow, God forbid that doesn't happen, but his timing is perfect. If I could teach one thing and really lean into that, it would be ask more questions. And genuinely, not though statements with question marks, right? Genuinely ask questions and be curious. And I'd give that advice to my 20-year-old self, how to save myself a lot of heartache. At the same time, I needed that heartache to be where I am now, to be so intentional with that.
All right, that's
a great
really
question.
Yeah, asking better questions is kind of an underlying topic that we talk about here on occasion, but not enough. And you're right, is ask good questions that leads to so many positive outcomes, regardless of the circumstance or situation that you're in.
Well, thank you for the great questions.
Oh yeah, so Keanu, this has really been good. So again, the main point here is to bring awareness, especially to maybe some listeners of ours who are not aware of your podcast. So where can listeners go to find more information, social media, just wherever, anything you want to share about how our listeners can find you?
Yes, Instagram at Building Belmont Podcast is our primary. That's where we post most of our content, but we are on every podcast platform and YouTube under the same Building Belmont Podcast, and you'll find us there. Personally, you can find me at Keanu_Trujillo on Instagram. That's where I also focus my efforts for social media. And if you have any questions or you want to share your story on the Building Belmont podcast, you can email me directly, connect@buildingbelmont.com.
Okay. Connect@buildingbelmont.com. So that's very good. So, Keanu, this has really been good. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate your kind of view and outlook of Gaston County. The more people that we can have understanding how great Gaston County is, and I like your recruitment statement. I mean, there's nothing wrong with bringing some more dynamic individuals into our county. So again, I'm grateful for what you're doing and appreciate it greatly. So I'm going to finish up this episode with my book recommendation, like I do typically each week, and this one is one I just finished reading over the last few weeks. It's called Lincoln on the Verge by a gentleman named Ted Widmer. And the reason I'm sharing it is it's about Abraham Lincoln, but it's about his trip that he had to take after he was elected. So it starts with the election of, I guess, 1860, and it ends when he arrives in Washington. So the reason I'm sharing it is probably because it's a good read, because we think we're in the current environment we're in. We think that we're so divided, and politics is so divided. But I tell you what, you read a little bit about that time frame here in America, and we were not quite as divided as the country was at that time. I mean, so it gives me, I think it helped give me some perspective on what he had to deal with just to get to Washington, D.C. from Springfield after he was elected. I mean, it was uncertain that he was going to make it because the country was so divided. So it just helped give me a little perspective, and it was a great read. So I would recommend that. And my quote and thought for the week, I'm actually for the first time going to use two quotes and thoughts, and I intentionally went to Abraham Lincoln, and I pulled one that I already used. It may be episode 9 or 10, but it's related to kind of what Keanu and I have talked about today, and it's also related to that the book about Abraham Lincoln, why I believe he was such a terrific president. But he said two different things. First one he said was, "I don't like that man. I must get to know him better." I tell you what, that's one. That's an aspirational quote for me because I wish I could do that. But again, I think that's a really good one. And then second, he said, "Those who look for the bad in people will surely find it." So those are both, to me, kind of an outlook. How do you view yourself and the people and relationship you have? Well, let me read both of those. The first one was, "I don't like that man. I must get to know him better." And he also said, "Those who look for the bad in people will surely find it." So again, take those for what it's worth. And again, to our listeners out there, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. Please continue to spread the word if you can about the podcast. And please don't hesitate to contact us here at our email, which is podcast@gastonsgreat.com. We're always looking for suggestions for future podcast topics and guests. You can find the I think you can, the podcast and subscribe at the website, gastonsgreat.com, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. And please follow us on all our social media platforms. And apparently, according to Naomi, giving us a good 5-star rating helps the podcast get noticed. Is that correct, Naomi? Okay. Thanks again to Keanu for being our guest today. Gaston's Great is produced and brought to you by Naomi Hunt and Amy Anderson from GSM Services and edited here locally by the Sumner Group. I'm your host, Stephen Long. Thanks again for hanging out with us, and please keep coming back to hear more reasons why Gaston's great.